Well, a lot of my books, I've tried to remove the kind of taboo or the negative associations we have with the word like power or with the word ambition. I try and say ambition is a good thing. It means that you believe in yourself, you have some self-love, and you believe you're worth something, and you want to go out and achieve and create something worthwhile for other people. So ambition is a positive thing. But so many people are just kind of embarrassed about being a human being, embarrassed about our primate nature, embarrassed about our own aggressive impulses.
This is partly why boys are failing in our schools now at a disproportionate rate. And I see this, there's an assault of the sort that you're describing on the better part of striving masculinity. And, I had a friend who killed himself because he identified his ambition with the patriarchal force that's devouring the environment, let's say, and that's the cause of historical horror. And you might say, well, no one takes that onto themselves to that degree. And you can say that, but that you just don't know what the hell you're talking about. People take that onto themselves all the time. And then they start to identify the best part of them that strives forward with the destructive impulses of humanity. And they're so ashamed because they can't do anything good then, but in principle, he tried to be as inoffensive and harmless in every possible way as he possibly could. And it just sucked all the life out of him.
You end up turning that aggressive energy on yourself is what ends up happening. And that's maybe leads to suicide, the ultimate kind of self-aggression. I know that I personally have, as I said, I definitely have a shadow side. I'm very aggressive and extremely competitive, and I have a lot of anger. So a lot of those experiences in my youth made me very angry. But the way I kind of integrated my shadow, I'm not saying this is a model, but the way I integrated it was through my books. I kind of, that anger kind of seeps through the material that I write. And I find I can only write when I have that kind of anger, but I don't rant. I don't yell and kind of put people down. I kind of channel it into something productive and something creative. And so to me,
I definitely do that when I'm lecturing. And people have commented, some of the people who've criticized me that I'm an angry person, and which isn't true. But it's definitely that anger, that capacity for anger definitely is something that gives you force, and it can push, and anger definitely. So psychophysiologically, so imagine that this is obviously a thought experiment, but imagine you're chasing a cat with a broom. Well, the cat's going to run from the broom. But if you corner the cat with the broom, it will attack you, even though it's just a cat. Well, and the reason for that is that fear will facilitate either freezing or escape. But sometimes fear isn't the right response, and anger will suppress fear. And so one of the tools that we have at our disposal psychologically is anger as an antidote to the terror that would otherwise freeze you. And you can integrate that. If you have some justifiable moral outrage, let's say something really annoys you, or I shouldn't say that, deeply violates your sense of moral propriety. I don't mean trivial things. Then the fact of that forceful response can motivate you to do things. Well, it does for me for lecture, but certainly to write. It takes a lot of energy to write, man. You need all those sources of energy if you're going to be able to do it. And even to turn it on yourself, to discipline yourself, It's like I had to grab myself by the scruff of the neck when I was a young guy to sit down, God damn it, and write. And there's a force that's necessary to, especially if you're open, because you're all over the place, if you're creative, to get yourself to sit down and focus.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And, some of that anger, I think Jung talks about this, is that dark side contains a lot of energy. It contains a lot of power. Those 2-year-olds that are kicking and screaming, that's all this kind of force behind it. And when you sort of are ashamed of it and you push that down, you're kind of getting rid of an incredible well of energy that you can use for your creativity, for your work, etc. You can take that energy, like you say, and create discipline out of it, do something creative out of it, support some cause that you really believe in, So that shadow side, when you deny it, only negative things will happen. And it is extremely important for people to first recognize it in themselves, and it's very hard for a lot of people to do that.
Well, I found, like I said earlier, that one of the best ways in there is resentment. You watch
How
yourself
so?
like, well, because if you're resentful, you're feeling like you're being victimized and mistreated. It's like, okay, well, maybe you are. Okay, and you think there's no anger in that resentment, so you're not looking hard enough. If you watch your fantasies, for example, if you're resentful and you watch the fantasies that flit through your imagination, like you might not want to attend to them because they can be so brutal.
Right.
But because if someone is oppressing you genuinely and you're not standing up for yourself, then there'll be these compensatory fantasies. Yeah. So one day I'll tell you a story about that. So one day I'd been renovating my house and it took a long time. And the neighbors, this house was a complete derelict and it was a semi-detached, like really a derelict. It hadn't been touched since like 1927. It had gas fittings in the upper floor. It needed to be completely gutted. And so we gutted it. And my daughter got sick at exactly the same time, really sick. And so it was stressful and difficult. And the neighbors they called the city on us. They did everything they could to make it difficult, even though they were attached to us and wanted to sell their house. So we probably added like $25,000 to the value of their house because it was no longer attached to a derelict. And then just as we were finishing, my sister and her husband came to visit, and I was making tea for them, and I closed the cupboard. So it clicked, and the neighbors banged on the wall. And then that night I couldn't sleep, and I had really been pushed to my limit by these people. And I had these visions in my mind of burning the damn place down. And I thought, oh man, if you're starting to think about burning the place down, you should probably go say something. So I put on my parka and I went outside about 6 a.m. and I just waited for them to come out. They never did, but I went and knocked over on the door and I said, I was making tea for my sister last night. And I closed the cupboard. You didn't happen to bang on the wall because you heard my cupboard closing, did you? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, look, if you bug me anymore, I'm going to cause you so much trouble you cannot possibly imagine it.
Yeah.
And I meant it. It was like, because I knew what was brewing in the back of my mind. I said, because I was done. It was like, you want a war? You have no idea what you're getting into. And so they backed into the kitchen, and like 2 hours later, they came over and said, oh, we're sorry and we won't do it again. But like what we did was the mistake you talk about. We backtracked continually trying to please them. And every time they complained, we did what they wanted because we assumed we were dealing with reasonable people, but we weren't. And the only way to stop them was with a show of force. It was like, you want to be malevolent? You want to play that game? It's like, okay, no problem.